Welcome to the Partnership Power Hour with your host, Sandra Shelson, featuring guests Lisa Kwasinski and Paula Broom.
All right, it's 10 o'clock, and we are going to get started with the Partnership Power Hour. I'm Sandra Shelson. I'm the Executive Director of the Partnership for a Healthy Mississippi, and the partnership has been a facilitator of these calls now for 2 years. We rebranded a few months back to try to streamline the process a little bit, and also to become a little bit more thematic in the messaging and the topics that we present to those of you from around the state. So again, I say good morning and welcome to the Power Hour. A little bit of housekeeping for you to know: everyone is on mute. At the appropriate time, if you need to, when we ask your questions, or if you are a speaker, you will make sure that your own phone is unmuted, and then you will *6 yourself. I'm excited today about our presentation. It really is a powerful message about our children in the state. And I'm also glad to be sharing the call with Sharon Nettles, who many of you know has been a part of this from the inception. And Sharon is the Yazoo County Extension Agent for the Mississippi State Extension Service, and you'll hear from her a little later. Well, and one thing I did want to mention, I always like to kind of give a little insight into some things that might be going on in the overall public health arena in Mississippi. And many of you may know that April is Stress Awareness Month, and here we are as we're ending April. I don't know about y'all, but the last 2 years have been particularly stressful for many people, our young people, our older people, our middle-aged people, all of us. And I read something today that I thought was particularly interesting, and it was talking about mental hygiene. I mean, we all brush our teeth, I hope at least minimally twice a day. I mean, at minimum twice a day, sometimes more. But if we have enough time to brush our teeth while we're brushing our teeth, or whenever we have a moment, we need to carve out a little bit of time to do our own mental hygiene. And it can be as little as 15 minutes a day. And just like anything else that you do, we have 15 minutes. I know for a fact I waste much more than 15 minutes a day, whether it's checking my phone or doing something else. And these helpful hints on mental hygiene talked about the fact that if you start your day in a calmer place, instead of waking up frantic and ending your day frantically, and just that being sort of your go-to mode, if we can take a few minutes to decompress and calm our minds, we will be more productive in the day. And I think it's really important that not only will that help us be more understanding of others, I think more importantly right now, maybe be a little bit more compassionate of ourselves. Sometimes the biggest critic we have is that voice in our head. And I think that if we can find ways to tell that voice to sit down and be quiet, it might help us all. So be kind to yourself. Try to find something and practice it, whether it's listening to, turn off talk radio and turn on something calming, some favorite songs. Dance while you're brushing your teeth. Just find something that makes you happy to start your day. All right. Now, without further ado, we're going to get on with the main topic of the day. We are so fortunate to have with us Paula Broom, who's the Director of Training at the Children's Advocacy Centers of Mississippi, and Lisa Kwasinski, who's the Program Director of the Children's Advocacy Centers of Mississippi. They are going to talk about their mission and the purpose, the resources for families and communities that are available. And their information, their biographical information, will be on our website. But rather than reading all of that to you, I'm going to let them do their own self-introductions and get right to the topic of the day. And I believe it was decided that Lisa would start our conversation off. So, Lisa, welcome to the Power Hour, and the time is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. I'm Lisa Kwasinski. I am the program director at the Children's Advocacy Centers of Mississippi. Been in social work, I hate to say how many years, about 21, working with children and families, and have been at the state chapter now for a couple of years. And I'm just really delighted to be here today and to kind of talk to y'all about how we serve the children of Mississippi. I'll just jump right into it. As far as our services that we have 12 children's advocacy centers all across the state. And the state chapter helps support these children's advocacy centers. We have 2 interested parties, so hopefully we will be adding to the number of children's advocacy centers around the state. Of course, we still have a lot more room to grow, and we're hoping that will, continue. And I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit today about how the Children's Advocacy Centers work with the multidisciplinary teams of each county. When you think about serving children and children who may have been abused, neglected, sometimes we think of one agency that might serve children, but the best practice is what we call the multidisciplinary team CAC model. And I will try not to use acronyms, but sometimes I do say MDT instead of multidisciplinary team, so you'll have to excuse me for that. I'll try to remember not to use so many acronyms. The multidisciplinary team model was crafted in 1985, and it was a district attorney in Alabama named Bud Kramer who saw that the response to children and child abuse was so fragmented. You had child protection, talking to children. You had law enforcement asking the same kind of questions to the child about what happened to them. Then again, you had the whole process of when a child went to court, and then the questions, were asked again. And he was one of the people that created and started the first child advocacy center, where the whole team, the law enforcement, CPS, and the child and the family could come to the Children's Advocacy Center to receive services in one spot. And so all of the team members of these agencies work together. And so that is what we have in Mississippi as far as the multidisciplinary team child advocacy model is what we call it. Then I just kind of want to talk about the services within the Child Advocacy Center that we support. Within the Child Advocacy Center, there is the forensic interviewer. That is staff that has been specially trained in what we call Child First Protocol to interview children. It is very neutral setting. It's fact-finding. A lot of times I explain it. It's not like law enforcement that asks really direct questions. It's in a setting to where the child feels comfortable and can tell quite possibly the worst thing that has ever happened to them in that setting, and to feel safe. And then there is the family advocacy. The family advocate of the Children's Advocacy Center helps the non-offending caregiver and also helps the child. But they may link resources for mental health. They may link resources for a forensic medical exam, community resources, and the list just kind of goes on and on about what the family advocate does. They also will accompany the child when it gets to the court process. And then we have the multidisciplinary team facilitator that works within the Child Advocacy Center. And their job is to facilitate these team meetings. When I talked about the MDT CAC model, that's all of the other team members along with the CAC staff that work to help coordinate the cases and to figure out what is the best plan for this family and this child. And last but not least, there's a mental health therapist that also is at children's advocacy centers, and they are specially trained in trauma-informed modalities that are specific to trauma victims and help them move through the process and help them to find hope and healing at the end of the day. So let me kind of go back just a second, because I kind of told you about like CAC staff or Children's Advocacy Center staff, and kind of go backwards to the multidisciplinary team. So back when in 1985, when everybody felt like this is just a fragmented response of all of these team members kind of asking the child the same question, they formed the multidisciplinary team, which includes the CAC, all of those staff that I just told you about, but also child protection workers, law enforcement, the prosecutor, the victim's advocate from the prosecution's office, the medical team, and mental health that maybe from other agencies would come in if they were working directly with the case. And the multidisciplinary team collaborates, and they work together for the best interest of the child and the non-offending caregiver. I can kind of give y'all also some statistics to kind of help you understand what kind of services that the Children's Advocacy Centers provide. In 2020, the chapter had their 20th anniversary, and we looked at the numbers of children that we served during that whole entire time. And so in 2010, just starting out, just forming those children's advocacy centers and really getting the model going, we served 1,735 children. And by the end of 2020, for all of that whole time, it was 44,320 children that we had served during that big span of time. In 2020, the number that we served just for that year was 7,495. So our multidisciplinary teams across the state have been doing a fantastic job as far as response to child abuse. I do have some numbers like for 2021. When I talked earlier about the forensic interview, in 2021, just that service alone, we served 4,358 children. Now, that does not mean that every child that is on the team automatically gets the forensic interview. Sometimes they only get mental health services or family advocacy services or medical services within that. I also kind of want to talk about, I know that we had sent over a information about child abuse indicators. If you want me to go ahead and kind of go into that, or was there questions about our service that you wanted to ask me before I moved on?
No, why don't we go ahead and move on, and then we may have some questions. The one question I will go ahead and just ask is, I know it's a little bit early for your statistics perhaps to have been compiled completely, but has there been a rise in the need for your services and the child abuse numbers because of COVID? I heard anecdotally that, whatever it was whatever was going on in a home had been exacerbated because of COVID.
So I will tell you that one of the things that we do for all of our teams and all of the disciplines within the CAC2, like the family advocacy, forensic interview, multidisciplinary teams, we have peer supports. And we have forensic interview peer supports every month that forensic interviewers have to hold to a standard. They have to be peer reviewed, have to bring an interview and be peer reviewed to make sure that they are doing the best techniques as possible. And I know during those peer reviews, just over these last 3 months, the theme, unfortunately, has been the severity of cases has seen an increase as well as the numbers. So yes, that has been, especially among just in the peer reviews and the forensic interviews, talking that the severity has shown an increase. Within COVID, and a lot of that is, for the fact that when we were in the pandemic and we were shut down, children did not have a place or a person to report the abuse, or for adults to lay eyes on children, as far as sometimes the school could see if a child had a bruise. Maybe they didn't disclose, but, it was that safety net there of children being out that then has shown an increase. I wanted to talk a little bit as we move through about some of the characteristics that we might find of a maltreating family. And really and truly, there is a whole list. And again, these are just possible characteristics. This does not mean that if a family has these characteristics, that means that they're abusing their child. But these are just a few. Some have just a lack of parenting skills. Some tend to be immature or dependent. The parent could be emotionally detached or numb, socially isolated, issues with hostility, anger, and rage, poor communication skills, the lack of any kind of coping skills or anger management skills. Sometimes parents may have a history of abuse themselves. Sometimes they may feel lack of not being in control of what's happening, and just relationship issues just within themselves. And again, that is just, some examples of some characteristics that we may see in a maltreating family. Also, some causes maybe of child maltreatment. We see poor self-esteem, poor self-image. The parent was abused as a child. We sometimes see children as the target, or they're rejected, or we call it like the scapegoat. Of course, we all know that substance abuse and mental health issues also could be factors in causes of child maltreatment. We had sent over to a small list, I will say, of child abuse indicators, and I just kind of wanted to go over those just a little bit. Physical abuse, of course, the bruises, any kind of lacerations, internal injuries, destructive or aggressive or disruptive behaviors. Also, the child may feel like seem passive or withdrawn, or may actually just kind of be numb and be emotionless. Fear of going home. That is, to me, as a social worker through the years working with children in the mental health field, that has been one of my little red flags as a social worker. If a child doesn't want to go home, let's figure out why. To me, that's one of the big indicators. Kids also may have increased behavior problems, impaired relationships with their peers, low self-esteem, poor concept. You may see a lot of fears or phobias in that child also. Sometimes we also see some obsessive compulsive behaviors in children. And again, these are just indicators to kind of watch for. This does not mean that this child has been physically abused. Also, as we look at indicators for child sexual abuse, of course, there's physical indicators that if they have injury to their genitalia area, difficulty walking or sitting, or pain or itching, those kind of things could be an indicator. But there's also a lot of behavior indicators. We would see a child maybe withdrawn, depressed, weight change either way, a loss of weight or an increase in weight. You may even see drug or alcohol abuse within children. You could see a change in their friends or poor relationships. You can see a change sometimes in their hygiene. They may feel threatened by physical closeness of someone. A teacher reach out and, give a side hug, and the child may feel threatened by that. Of course, nightmares and sleep. Some children have bedwetting. Some can withdraw into a fantasy world even. We also see emotional detachment, and also can see sexualized behaviors both to the extreme and then like either having no sexual behavior whatsoever with that. One of the other areas that we put on the list was neglect, and some of those indicators may be malnourishment or listlessness, stealing or begging for food, again, the lack of personal hygiene, having needs, like, for instance, their glasses, needing glasses or dental care or other medical attention that otherwise would be taken care of is not, absence from school or tardiness, and child is inappropriately left unattended without supervision. One of the things that we did not put on our indicators that I did want to talk about just for a second was psychological abuse. That is one of the hardest forms of abuse to kind of identify, but it is very prevalent with our children. Some of the behaviors of the parent may be they may reject the child, or they may be intimidating, ridiculing the child, or belittling the child. They may be hostile toward the child or have bizarre discipline techniques. They may also have substance abuse or have parents killing the child's pet as a form of control and emotional abuse over them. Some child behavior for this, again, could be eating issues, sleeping problems. You may see kids rocking or headbanging, or some kind of nervous habit like biting their fingernails, excessive or unrealistic fears for their age, bedwetting, stuttering, defiant and runaway behaviors, and just maybe some social developmental delays that otherwise for a child that age would not have. Difficulty concentrating and poor peer relationships. So, unfortunately, it's a lot of there. And lot under that. And so just wanted to talk a little bit about child abuse and some of the indicators, and also to make sure that everybody knows the Mississippi Department of Child Protection's hotline number. If you suspect abuse, and Paula may go over this too, but I'm going to make sure that you have it. It's 1-800-222-8000. That is the hotline for reporting child abuse, and that is how we can, if we don't know, if you don't report, even if you suspect out of good faith child abuse, it will not get to the team unless somebody reports. So, and I think that's about all I had on my side. I know Paula's got a lot more, so.
Yeah. If we suspect it, are there, and I know Paula will probably cover some of this, and I guess, Paula, I'm putting these questions out there and, whoever's going to answer them. But what about protection for the person who does make that phone call, and then also the ones who are obligated? I know very well, you're going to be talking about the laws. So those are two things I think that most of us would have some questions about. And I know that this is a lousy statistic, but what is the kind of the breakdown? Are children who are psychologically abused, are they getting, is that getting recognized? Physical abuse is something that you've got eyes, you can see. There's a bruise, there's a black eye, there's, something like that. But the psychological abuse, that's troubling in different ways. So could you speak a little bit more about how that's identified and then subsequently how that would be treated?
Well, yes, and anybody will tell you on our multidisciplinary teams the difficulty of navigating psychological maltreatment alone. Unfortunately, sometimes it follows with one of these other forms of abuse, whether it's neglect or sexual abuse or physical abuse. I would say that the treatment, well, let me back up. I will say that the child protection they are looking for that also. Just as I talked about, like these indicators, again, these are indicators. It's not set in stone like, okay, the child is a runaway, so therefore they're psychologically abused. There's a lot of assessment that goes into, cases. But it is, as social workers, we're looking and we're trying to be aware of this also as we're assessing families and what's going on. And our multidisciplinary team members also take this into consideration. When multidisciplinary teams come together once a month to talk through cases, and that's the beauty of the team, because you're going to have somebody on that team to ask, well, what if? Or, okay, this child's doing this, so could it be this? Or could it be the psychological neglect? So that is one of the ways of making sure that it's not the burden of one agency when we come together as a multidisciplinary team and talking through, our cases. As far as treatment for psychological neglect and really all abuse that we're talking about, the best practice is there's 3 mental health modalities that are recognized by the National Children's Alliance as far as the best practice for kids who have dealt with any kind of trauma. And that is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. I know that's a long word, but in short, it's called TFCBT. There's another one that's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. You may have heard this therapy called EMDR. Those 2 are the most prevalent for children that are ages 6 to 17, and EMDR is even beyond. Adults who suffer from trauma can also have that type of therapy. And then for the smaller children from ages really 2 to 6, and the cutoff may be 5, it's called a parent-child interaction. And this is a form of trauma therapy that works closely with that child for that age group. So we have some good treatment modalities out there for children and for the non-offending caregivers to make sure that they have the treatment. And as multidisciplinary teams meet, they look at all of those things, all of the well-being of the child from not only mental health, but also the medical aspect too. We have our children receive forensic medical exams from the Safe Center, and that is just a head-to-toe checkup, making sure that the child is okay, but that is part of the services that the multidisciplinary team looks at for making sure that we have whatever we need for the child to become healed and whole. And it's haven't even talked, I know Paula will talk more about the prosecution part of it, but again, the teams make sure that this family is looked after from beginning of the case till the very end.
Okay. Is there anything else from your perspective that this group could do? You know, we plan to share the information. I think it's wonderful that, raise awareness. But, from the program standpoint, what would you tell us as interested citizens of the state of Mississippi who care about our children? What would you tell us to do?
Well, of course, be aware. Find out if there is a child advocacy center in your area or near your area and give them a call. They would be glad to show you how their resources and their child advocacy center works. Of course, they, for confidentiality reasons, it would be a tour when nobody is in the building. But they would be glad to show you. The family advocates of each child advocacy center is also a good resource as far as, people interested in helping or helping families. Some of our child advocacy centers have clothes closets and things like that. So that would be probably the first thing that I would say is to get to know if you have one, that's close in your area.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Paula, let's hear from the legal side.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Lisa's a hard act to follow, but I'm going to sure try. My name is Paula Broom. I'm the Director of Training for Children's Advocacy Centers of Mississippi. Fairly new to this job. I started here in December after retiring from the state. I had 25 years with the state. 17 years of that was as a Special Assistant Attorney General. And so that's why I'm coming to you to bring kind of the legal perspective. And I'm going to talk to you about a number of things from mandatory reporting to I'm going to just touch on a few of the crimes. But before I get into that, I just want to kind of piggyback on what Lisa ended with and the question that Sandra asked as far as what community members can do. One thing I want to say about your children's advocacy centers is they're nonprofit entities, and they cover quite a number of counties. There's only 12 in the state, and they cover multiple counties. So if you have a get to know, as Lisa said, get to know who services your county, and be aware of they are out there. They depend on community support. They're out there doing fundraisers. I know for us, the Children's Advocacy Centers of Mississippi, we just had a walk run on Saturday. But there will be things that are going on in your communities that the Children's Advocacy Centers are doing, some of which are fundraisers. So I know they are very dependent on the support of the communities, and it is a service that the children desperately need as they identify and address, this horrible thing that has happened to a child. It was touched on earlier about the reporting. Mississippi does have mandatory reporting laws, and I think most people know that every person is a mandatory reporter of child abuse or child neglect. And under our laws, a child, for that reporting purpose, is a child under the age of 18 who is not married or who is not active duty military. And that report is mandated to go to the child abuse hotline that is operated by the Mississippi Department of Child Protection Services. And Lisa gave you that number. And so that call needs to be made. First, the law requires an oral report immediately to Child Protection or CPS, and followed as soon thereafter by a written report. And it's Child Protection, CPS's job to, at that point, they will screen the cases. They will then make assignments out to their social workers, their caseworkers, their investigators, and they launch basically an investigation for the protection side. And when I say the protection side, their role is this child, can we substantiate abuse or neglect, not necessarily for the criminal prosecution, a little bit lesser than that, and is this child safe? Does CPS need to, they're going to look at the home, they're going to look at who the child is living with, does the child need to remain in the home, does there need to be another placement outside the home to keep the child safe? So they're looking at this from a protection standpoint. CPS, it has a mandate themselves that anytime they get a case that basically amounts to what would be a felony, they are mandated to report that to law enforcement so that law enforcement can start the criminal investigation. So you kind of have two things going on at the same time. You've got your protection side that CPS is doing, and then if it is a felony, they've reported to law enforcement, and law enforcement will launch their criminal investigation, which obviously criminal investigation, this may be heading to a prosecution if there is evidence of the crime. But child abuse in Mississippi, child abuse or neglect, there is a definition, and it is pretty much what you think it is. So I'm not going to bore you with all the legal jargon that's in our statutes. But I do want to point out that under the definition of an abused child, it starts off by saying an abused child means a child whose parent, guardian, or custodian, or any person responsible for his care or support has caused or allowed some kind of abuse, whether it be physical abuse, sexual abuse, could be sexual exploitation, could be emotional, it could be some kind of non-accidental physical injury or other maltreatment. So for the definition of abused child, that is the perpetrator, a parent, guardian, or custodian, or person responsible for the care of the child. And remember, we're looking at this through CPS's eyes of protection. Who's in the home with the child? Is the abuser in the home? Is the child being protected? Included in the definition is a child who has been trafficked. And for a trafficked child, and that's whether they're labor trafficked or sex trafficked, then the perpetrator, it doesn't matter who the perpetrator is for reporting purposes. So that perpetrator does not have to be a parent, guardian, or someone responsible for the care of the child to trigger the mandatory reporting duty under child abuse and neglect reporting. We do have a definition of neglect, and that's another one of those. It's a very long and wordy statute, very broad, and we're looking at things from the protection side on neglect. Is the child being cared for? Does the child have a place to live? Does the child have food that's adequate? Is the child being provided with education? Child being provided with proper medical care, proper supervision? And the neglect statute just goes on and on. The question that I get most times when I'm teaching and talking about the laws, particularly mandatory reporting laws, is how do I know I'm not overreacting to something that may not be abuse or neglect? And folks tend to kind of struggle with this. And the reason that I'm told they're struggling with this is that they are hesitant to call CPS because they might be wrong, that there's really no abuse or neglect. And now they've gotten CPS involved, and CPS is going to do an investigation, and they may report it to law enforcement, and the child may be taken out of the home. And it is true, all of those things could happen. One thing I will say for CPS is their marching orders is not to remove the child, their marching orders to protect the child, which could be removal. But if they can keep the child with the family and do so safely, then that's going to be the first choice of not removing the child. But when folks ask me, how do I know? My rule of thumb is this: if you are debating with yourself whether to report, then you should probably report. And get that report to the people whose job it is to take a look at this, to investigate, and determine, is it abuse, is it neglect? And it could turn out that it's not abuse or it's not neglect. But even if it turns out that that's not what has happened, it may be that CPS now, because of their involvement with the family, can identify some resources that the family needs to provide better care for the child. So there is a positive that certainly can happen when they don't substantiate abuse or neglect. So the standard in the law is reasonable suspicion. So if you have a reason to suspect abuse or neglect, the law does require you to report that. It can be anonymous, and the Department of Child Protection Services is under a duty to keep that reporter anonymous. So that's not going to be just reported out to the families they're investigating. Now, of course, once we get into a courtroom, lots of different things could happen where the reporter's name's possible it would come out if it's necessary, and a lot of times it's not. But a court can certainly issue a subpoena requiring that type of information. But again, it would be if the reporters who reported really matters, is necessary to the court case. So I want to talk about a couple of other reporting statutes that we have, mandatory reporting statutes that people may not know about. As I said, everybody kind of knows reporting child abuse or neglect has been around forever. But we do have another mandatory reporting statute, and it's for reporting a sex crime against a minor. And this reporting statute really came about, some of you may remember, the child sex abuse cases that made national news from Penn State that involved the coaches, Coach Sandusky, and I think Paterno was mentioned in that as well. Following that fallout in Pennsylvania, the Mississippi legislature passed the Children's Protection Act, and under that act is sex crime against a minor. And this requires persons in certain occupations to report a sex crime against a minor. And the occupations that are mandated would be any healthcare practitioners. So that's anybody in healthcare, working for a hospital, clinic, anything like that. Law enforcement officers are mandated reporters under this. Clergy, anybody involved in teaching, child care providers, any kind of group homes, daycare centers, anything taking care of children. And then, of course, the last group would be commercial image processors. So think about the folks down at your local drugstore that are developing photos with persons committing crimes. They're not always the smartest people, and they will have pictures developed at a public place, so we know commercial image processors are seeing some of the evidence. But a sex crime against a minor is defined specifically. This is where an adult, so somebody 18 or older, has committed a sex crime, and they're under the statute. There are a whole bunch of statutes listed: rape, sexual battery, fondling, child exploitation, trafficking of a child. The list is fairly lengthy. But if an adult commits any of those crimes against a minor under 16, then the sex crime against a minor mandated reporting is in play. And again, that is for persons in certain professions that you are required to report that. And the report for this is not to CPS, it is to law enforcement. So you just want to be aware of that reporting duty. Another reporting duty is the duty to report human trafficking. If any person in the state who has reasonable cause to suspect a minor is a trafficked person, must report two ways. One, you have to report to Child Protection Services through the Child Abuse Hotline, or you can report through their website as well. And you have to report a suspicion of trafficking to the Human Trafficking Coordinator at the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. And the number to report that is 601-987-1671, or you can report through email at reportht@dps.ms.gov. But every person is mandated to report suspected trafficking of a minor, and again, a minor being someone under the age of 18. And then last reporting statute I wanted to mention, this one's fairly new, so I don't know that, and when I say fairly new, 5-6 years old, if that, and that would be fairly new when we talk about laws. It's the mandated reporting of a child fatality or near fatality. Every person in the state is under this mandate, and if you have reason to believe that a child fatality or near fatality has occurred, that report goes through the child abuse hotline. Now, this does not mean every fatality or near fatality. There's actually a definition of both of those. Child fatality means sudden or unexpected or otherwise unexplained death of a child between ages of birth and 18 years. And then a child near fatality would include any occurrences where the child's physical condition is medically diagnosed as serious or critical, and you've got some indication that injuries are caused by abuse or neglect, or there's an unexplained cause. So again, everybody is a mandated reporter under the child fatality, near fatality statute. For all of these mandatory reporting statutes, there is a penalty for failing to report that you could certainly be prosecuted under. I'll pause there just in case, I don't know, Sandra, if you have any questions just on the reporting. I'm going to move, and we're about out of time, but I want to move just to a couple of other things before we get into all the questions. Is there anything on reporting specifically?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question. As far as the sex with the minor, how does that interact with statutory rape? A lot of people have heard of statutory rape. Is there, gee, officer, I thought she was 18, that kind of stuff. So what's the difference in those two statutes?
Well, the statute, the sex crime against a minor is a reporting statute. And statutory rape is one of the crimes that is mandated to be reported if you suspect a child has been raped, whether it falls to statutory, forcible, or rape by administration of substances. So we're talking about a reporting statute versus what the crime itself may be. Now, for statutory rape, that is one type of rape in the state of Mississippi. And I'm actually glad you asked that question. I didn't know if I'd have time to get to it. But there seems to be some confusion about statutory rape in general and where that applies and where it doesn't. For statutory rape to even be on the table and considered as a crime and for prosecution, we're having to look at the age of the child and the age of the perpetrator, because the age difference does matter. And our statutory rape statute is divided into two sections. So I can, from a prosecution standpoint, I can get to statutory rape if I have a person 17 or older who is having sexual intercourse with a child who is at least 14 but under 16, where the perpetrator is 36 months or more older than that child, and they are not married. So if I can hit all of those elements, then we may have a statutory rape case. The second subsection, that just takes the age lower, and it applies to any person of any age who has sexual intercourse with a victim who is under 14, and there's a 24-month or more difference in age where the perpetrator is older and, again, not married. And for statutory rape, consent is not an issue here. It's not an element. So the defendant can't say, well, so-and-so consented. Well, if we meet these ages, then by law they can't consent. So it doesn't matter if they consented. And it may be that, yes, the child did say yes, but it doesn't matter because by law they cannot consent. Ignorance of age, I thought she was older or he was older, is also not a defense in the courtroom. One of the biggest surprises I think most people have when I talk about statutory rape is that a 16-year-old in the state of Mississippi can consent to sexual intercourse. So if there's a 30-year-old that is having sexual intercourse with a 16-year-old, and that 16-year-old has consented, then that is not a crime. That is not statutory rape. And a lot of people are surprised by that. And I'll get those questions. Would you mean there's nothing I can do if a 40-year-old is having sexual intercourse with my daughter? And I have to say, well, from a legal prosecution standpoint, at 16, he or she can consent. So that kind of breaks down that difference.
Thank you so much, Paula. That does help clear things up for me. Okay, so does anybody else have any questions for our speakers today?
Sandra, I do have one question. I was wondering if you all provide sessions for early childhood providers that provide contact hours.
We have an annual conference, our One Loud Voice conference, which is this year's going to be November 9th and 10th at the Beau Rivage down the coast. It's 2 full days, and we do offer CEUs for social work hours, for marriage and family hours. We also offer CLEs for lawyers. We'll offer law enforcement hours. Now, for early childhood contact hours, I don't know enough about what your requirements are, but we could certainly find out, and maybe it's something that would qualify as your contact hours. And I don't know, I'll throw it to Lisa. I don't know if she has anything that she can add as far as contact hours.
I am not sure about that either. Because I'm not familiar with early childhood credits, but there are a lot of really great topics at that One Loud Voice conference that it would just, you could contact one of us and we could kind of dig into it to see if those would suffice for what your needs are.
Okay, sounds great, because I'm the extension agent in Yazoo County, and I'm actually looking at hosting a child caregivers training in Yazoo in the summer. And I know the child care providers do come out because they are in need of those contact hours, and that's where the organization would actually go through the Department of Health to get approval to give those contact hours to them. And I know a lot of them might not be able to travel, so I wanted to invite you all to come to the one that I will be hosting over the summer, but I know they will be needing those contact hours. But I can give you more information about that.
Yeah, for any training that you want us involved in, just reach out to us. Let us know what it is you're looking for, and then talk to the Department of Health to determine what do they need for it to qualify. Do we is there a particular application process? For some there is. For some, they just want to see the PowerPoint or the agenda just to see if it's going to qualify and how many hours it would qualify. But we're definitely happy to work with you on that.
Do we have any additional questions?
Yes, I do have an additional question.
Okay.
All right. So earlier it was mentioned that these community children advocacy centers rely very heavily on fundraising. So where can we go to learn more about fundraising events for our local advocacy centers?
Well, Lisa may have a better answer than I, but one, I would contact your child advocacy centers directly. Would probably be the best way to find out. And then, these are usually advertised as far as the fundraisers. And I don't know, Lisa, do the individual child advocacy centers have a website? I know we have one for the chapter here for CACM.
Yes. Usually, yes, all the advocacy centers do have a website. If you could tell me what area you are in, I could tell you probably a couple of CACs that may be close to you.
Yes, ma'am. We're in Rankin County.
Okay, so in Rankin County, there are 2 children's advocacy centers. One is called the Parker Center that serves Rankin County, and that's, I think, in Brandon, Mississippi. And also Hinds County has a children's advocacy center. It's called Central Mississippi Children's Advocacy Center. So you're lucky you've got two right there, really close.
And the Parker Center's in Pearl.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Hey, y'all, I'm from Tupelo, so I'm bad. I'm bad with locations in the South. Sorry, I'm from the northern part of the state.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Katrina LaFleur Hospital. And I'm noticing your locations on the website, and the Mississippi Delta seems to be very underserved in this area. What would you do to recommend for someone to set up an advocacy center in the Delta?
Well, I will say earlier when I said we had some interested parties that were forming, in the process of forming a child advocacy center, there's a lot of steps in order to get one going. And there is one in Bolivar County that has kind of started the process with the state chapter. So that's good. That's good news. And I do understand that area children's advocacy centers are much needed there. But there is, I will tell you, there is one that has started the paperwork and is trying to get started with funding and building locations and things like that in Bolivar County.
Oh, that is great news. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Are there any other questions? Well, we are after 11. It has been another great. I know Sharon, you always like to get us, sign us off. Okay. So I'm going to let you do that.
Okay.
And we're very excited about the call in 2 weeks. So y'all help share the information, and I hope y'all all have a great rest of your week. Go ahead, Sharon.
Yes, and I'll close us out. We'll forego our extension minute, but I am just going to bring some announcements. The Extension Service, we will, in Yazoo County, we are hosting a get-to-know extension lunch and learn on next Tuesday, May 3rd, a lunch and learn, just to invite the community out about all the different services that we do provide and see how we can actually partner. We're going to have it at 12 o'clock noon at the library on Main Street. So if you are available and you work the Yazoo County area, please come out to find out how we can partner to bring some of the services to the Yazoo County area. Also, another announcement, Teenage Mothers Connect is a program that the Postpartum Support International Organization hosts every first and third Thursday of each month. And it's for a group of moms, 19 years old and younger, with 2-year-old children and younger, to find out how they can connect with one another, how they can encourage one another. And it is a non-judgmental support group. If you need more information about this particular organization, you can call 1-800-944-4773. And I just thought it all tied in with what we discussed today, what the presenters talked about today, because we want them to have that support system. We want them to be healthy mothers so that they will not abuse their children. Another community announcement as well. Let me grab it real quick. Mount Salem, King Solomon MB Church will be hosting a community health and resource fair this Wednesday, actually tomorrow from 1 to 5 o'clock. They're going to have health screenings, nutrition information. The extended service will be out there as well, providing the community with information about the different programs that we provide as well. As Sandra has said, this has been another awesome community connection call where they brought us up to date on all the awesome programs that they offer. And I love what you said. I think Ms. Paula said this about hope and healing, that they have so many advocates and they have people in place to walk with our young children to help them through the healing process. So we celebrate you. We applaud you for the efforts that you are doing in the community. As Ms. Lisa said, we are all mandatory reporters. So if we suspect something, that we need to report it, and we need to call 1-800-222-8000. Again, that number is 1-800-222-8000. 8,000. You all have provided some awesome information. We have a few seconds. Do we have any additional community announcements before I close the call? Any of the community announcements? If there are no other community announcements, again, we thank our presenters today. We thank the Partnership for Health in Mississippi. Again, reach out to the website to if you want to hear this podcast or if you want to share this podcast with other individuals, healthy-miss.org and that's Miss MISS or just Google the Partnership for Health in Mississippi to find out more resources about the previous podcast, but especially this one. This one has all of them have great information, but this one covered a lot of information. We don't even have enough time to cover everything. But again, it was another awesome call. Thank you, Partnership for Health in Mississippi, for continuing to allow the Extension Service to be a partner with this. Thank you, Lisa and Paula. You all did a phenomenal job in describing all the services that you all provide and giving us the indicators, the things that we need to look out for if we are in a situation where it could be a neighbor, it could be a child that we work with, but we are mandatory reporters. Again, community partners, we could not do these calls without you. Continue to share this information with the individuals that you work with in the community. If you have a program idea, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or to reach out to Sandra. We'd love to hear about it. Again, my name is Sharon Nettles. You can reach me at 601-497-9884. And again, everyone, thank you again for joining us. Have an awesome week, and we hope you will join us in 2 weeks again. And stay safe.